Good morning. Um, I got a request on the interwebs about attunement, and I think that's a great topic. It's one that I've lectured on before. Most of you don't know this, but in a former life I was a child psychiatrist and an adult psychiatrist. But I specialized a lot in children in the dependency system, the foster system, where attunement with a child is a very sometimes a very difficult matter, and a very important one, though, because without attunement to the child, a mother can't do very well in mothering, and the relationship is unsatisfying, and it's problematic, and it's not easy. But even in the best of circumstances, children go through phases where they're very difficult to deal with. For example, if they're way up and down in the night over and over and over. But usually there's some support, and usually there's some adaptation of the biorhythms. There's an ancient saying, a Sufi saying actually, that nothing is difficult once you're used to it. But today I don't want to talk so much about early infancy, but more into toddlerhood and early development, and maybe into latency and adolescence, and actually beyond. And so the topic will be attunement, and the question is, what is attunement? Well, attunement is not attachment. Attunement is not a nervous helicopter attitude. Attunement is not trying to get the kid to do what you want it to do. It's something else. It's more like being attuned with, being alongside, being with. It's a radical form of empathy, actually. It's kind of like the paradigm of empathy, because you're really one with the child. There's a word, grok, which was used in a novel called Stranger in a Strange Land. And in this novel, Michael Valentine, a guy from outer space or something, I read it when I was a teenager. We didn't have a word for what he was trying to describe, which was to know someone so well and to be so finely attuned with them, so finely connected with them, that you almost became as one entity. And later in my life, I started studying Buddhism. And I studied interdependent origination, which is the interconnection of all things, right? And how everything is interdependent on everything else. And with that, I saw some major problems with attachment theory, which is unilateral and unidirectional. I know I'm oversimplifying somewhat, but the mentality that you're only going to look at the child and not look at the mother-child dyad as a unit is deeply flawed, in my opinion. And it's deeply flawed all the way across the spectrum, from trying to understand what's going wrong, trying to understand what to do, or trying to understand how to fix something. And so attunement with a child, depending on the age, is going to take on different forms. It's going to look different. Attunement with a child is let me see. It's easy for me to just pick an age and go from there. So let me take a 8-year-old boy. Healthy 8-year-old boys are curious, and they're somewhat exploratory, and they're somewhat rambunctious, and they can be quite mischievous, and they can get into trouble, but they can be very, very delightful, and they're absorbing like crazy. And their brains are evolving just like they were doing when they were younger, right? When they're in toddlerhood and even earlier, when their brains are really, really evolving very, very rapidly. And so attunement with a boy like that would be to understand and maybe to go along with his attitude towards the world of curiosity and wonder and questions and just like, wow, because kids are born into the world. They don't know the world. And if we jam it into them with video screens, or with preaching, or with our mentalities, or we know the answer to everything already, some of that's okay for the kid, maybe even good for the kid. if a father does that or a mother does that, because he does need to know certain things, right? Like, basic things are facts of the world. But on the other hand, the rest of it's wide open, and to be in an exploratory mindset with a boy, and we're speaking right now just of a boy at this age, right? So just to be in that exploratory mindset is one facet of being attuned with a child at that age, of that ilk. Now others are different, okay, and so it could be that your child or a child has a very different temperament than that. In which case, it would be to be attuned with that child would be to respect that within boundaries, right? Of course, none of this is being silly, right? And going along with it, and understanding that children are constantly changing. They're growing rapidly. Their character hasn't even formed yet. Their personalities are being formed. Their worldviews are being formed. Their belief systems are being formed. This is a very, very big responsibility for an adult. I can't think of a bigger one towards an individual. And so to attune with a child is to be with that child deeply. To grok that child is another way to put it. And to cherish that grokking, and to realize that you're part of it too, right? So there's not just a parent, there's a parent-child dyad, and that unit is as important as either one alone, right? It's as important. And so while the child is developing, this is critically important to understand, to respect, to model, to enjoy, and to be. Because if you're in that role, and those of you in that role know how precious it can be, and it doesn't last, so enjoy it. But then we get to the issue of attunement in love, right? Attunement with your partner, with your boyfriend, with your girlfriend, with your partner, whatever. Well, here, this is different, because you're not going to be identical with your partner. And to attune with your partner is to endeavor to understand them, to understand where they're coming from, to be able to see the world as they see it, which is very difficult sometimes, especially if you have very different backgrounds or very different, worldviews or very different expectations or very different personalities or temperaments. But to attune with that person is to become like one with that person, and then again, you become one unit. And this one unit, is part of larger units, right? And this is like a foundational teaching of Mahayana Buddhism. That there's no islands in this universe. There's no such thing as something that lives alone, isolated. Everything is interconnected, and not only is it interconnected, but it's interconnected reciprocally, such that one person is going to affect the other. One partner is going to affect the other partner, and the other partner is going to be changed by that somewhat, hopefully, and then they're going to respond in a different manner than they would have before they were changed, and vice versa, on and on and on and on into infinity. And so this notion of attunement in your mature relationships with people, not just your partners, but it could also be with an organization. It could be with a team, and the team with you, or an organization with you, or a group working on a project. There's no limit to the numbers of places where we can apply this principle, because this principle is a foundational one of nature. It's a foundational one of this universe. And so one of the things we really suffer from these days is that we've focused on one little facet, which is the individual. And when you do that, you run into huge amounts of problems, because there's no such thing. All of us are I can hear my mother in my voice right now. And the same thing with my father and the way they're part of me. And as everyone I've met, and everyone that I've encountered, and the books that I've read, and the movies I've seen, and for better or for worse, the television I saw growing up. And so here, along with the understanding that everything is reciprocally interconnected, there's a caution, a warning to be careful. Be careful with what you put into your brain, because if you put junk in, you're going to get junk out, and that's just the way it is, right? Pretty much. And so be careful with yourself and with people you care about, and organizations you care about, or projects you care about, or anything you care about, and to not be reckless, but to be attuned, and to not just the dyad in this case, certainly not to the individual, but and not just to the dyad, and not to the team or the organization or the tribe or whatever you want to call it, but the location of that, which is by necessity interconnected with everything else in the world. And so there's no again, the Buddhists teach in their teachings on emptiness, they teach that there's no individual thing in the cosmos. Everything is interconnected with everything else. And we need more understanding of that. There is no such thing as one race, or one tribe of people, or one pure ethnicity, or anything like that. That's just not something that actually occurs in nature. Just take a look. You look at the animals. They vary, and they interact, and they evolve, and we're evolving. And it's painful to evolve sometimes, but not if you understand that's what's happening, and you understand that evolution, although it has its its ups and downs, and it can move backwards. We got to guard against that, because moving backwards is a very real possibility. The general trajectory on this earth, in this cosmos, is evolution forward. And so we're moving forward, but we need to be conscious of that. We're part of a much larger processes, okay? And so that in attunement with the world, we understand that. And we help each other along, and we understand each other's suffering, or misconceptions, or our ignorance, right? And we do something to help that ignorance, not ridicule it, to bring light when there's darkness, not stamp it out even further, because to use force instead of power, the power of understanding, the power of knowledge, the power of insight, the power of, in religious terms, the power of God, the power of truth, the power of you don't have to be religious, the power of the way things are, reality. Let's call it reality. We can call God reality, okay? And so to attune with reality, to attune with God, to do the will of God, is one way of phrasing the same Taoist conception that the goal, that a well-lived life is lived in attunement with the way. So what does it mean to attune with the way? Well, on its most superficial levels, there's a great book by Thomas Clary called The Essential Tao, which I highly recommend. It's short. It's 82 pages is all that the Tao is. It's a very short little treatise, but it's been studied nonstop for 2,500 years. I'm still studying it. It's amazing stuff. And it's the root for all kinds of things: Confucianism, Buddhism, evolution. There was a lot of cross-fertilization between China and the Middle East and India and Egypt and all that we in the West don't know very much about, but other people do. So at any rate, so we tend to equate the Tao with nature, and that's nothing wrong with that. So attuning with nature would mean to realize that you're part of nature, and that nature has its cycles, and that nature has its waves, and nature has its tides, and its seasons. And I think in the Bible, for example, they talk about the season. There's a season for this and a season for that. And I think it's Ecclesiastes. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to fight, a time to lay down arms, a time to sow, a time to reap. Well, this is very Taoistic in its conception, or its articulation. And so the reason it matters now is because sometimes we go to war with each other over anything, or we go to war over each other, especially money or land, but also religion or theology, or also politics or this or that, or God help us, a race or something like that. That's just insanity of the highest order. Makes no sense whatsoever from any perspective. And we have a history of doing some pretty horrible things to each other. But moving forward, we can't afford that. We've got too many powerful weapons, too many, people that are bad actors. We have too many ways for psychopaths to get in among us and create havoc. And so we have to, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here. What I'm trying to say is that we have far, far, far more in common with ourselves, each other, and with nature than we commonly recognize. And nature is supremely wise and supremely intelligent and incredibly well put together. It never has to remind itself to have a season or a tide. It never has to set rules that says, hey, your leaves have to fall off at this time, or this or that. It knows, right? Animals know. Insects know. Everything knows what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and it does it perfectly. And, going back to Jesus, he says, consider the lilies of the field. Neither do they toil, nor do they weave. And yet not even Solomon in all his glory was, ordained as beautifully as one of these. And so what he's saying is that just look outside and you can see the wisdom of reality, the wisdom of God, the wisdom of truth right out the door in every living creature you see. And scientists know this. Now, I don't know what has happened in these last 100 years where they've decided they're going to become hardcore atheists, which is just as, I don't know, it's just as narrow and small as being a hardcore, I'm a fundamentalist of this ilk, and that's it, and that's the only way, that's the only truth there is on the planet is, whatever, take your pick. But the rigidity is what we don't see in nature. Because a tree that's rigid snaps when there's a hurricane. And so the wisest trees are flexible, right? And they bend. And this is wisdom for humans, right? If you're too rigid in your life or with your loved ones or with your child or with your organization, with your team, something's going to snap, right? Sooner or later. And there's all kinds of wisdom in these ancient texts where they talk about being, open and free flowing and more like water than like iron, And so I don't want to belabor it too much, but that's kind of I hope that's I don't know what came out, but I hope that's kind of a introduction to attunement. And so attunement with a child, attunement with a partner, attunement with your, whoever you're working with, attunement with your society, attunement with each other as societies or nations, and then finally attunement with the way, which is basically what every great philosopher, religious person, spiritual genius, spiritual guide, they all end up in the same place. Accord with what is, and do what you can to do your part to if everyone were to accord, then we wouldn't have nearly the problems we have, and have some respect for the beauty and the intelligence of what we've been given. And I don't think that's too much to ask, and I think other people feel the same way, and that's why I got the question, which, by the way, I really appreciate. So if there's other questions like that, feel free to reach me on X. I'm at David Arredondo. Or you could put questions on YouTube. Those are the only two that I use. And okay, I hope that answers it. If there's any follow-up questions, please let me know. All right? Thank you.